So, welcome to session 5, Impact of Information and Communication Technologies on Freedom of Religions or Belief. I hope you eat well, but not too much, to not having a nap during the session. And this session will focus on the impact of artificial intelligence on freedom of religion and belief. Normally, we should have 4 speakers, but Ekaterina Andronescu, as Romanian, couldn't come for all the same reason, political vote to the parliament. Perhaps you will have questions to the speakers, so write them down to the end. We will see how much time we have to answer to the questions, but please be concise and direct to your question, so we can take the most questions as possible at that time. I didn't Googleize the invitees, the speakers, but I asked the AI. So, and for the first one, for Jaime Rossell Granados, I asked ChatGPT, and the answer was given with the source of the AIDLR website. So I said, okay, I will do on my own. It's quite easier. So Jaime Rossell Granados is professor of Ecclesiastical law at the University of Extremadura, Spain, and specialist in religious freedom, church-state relations, and fundamental rights. The title of your keynote is Lights and Shadows of Artificial Intelligence on Religious Freedom. So I'm looking forward to listen to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Paulo Machado, his team, the AIDLR, to inviting me to celebrate with you the 80th anniversary of your commitment in promoting and defending religious freedom, and also to invite me to share some thoughts about a new challenge, lights and shadows of artificial intelligence and religious freedom. In recent times, as a result of the relationship between humans and technology, the emergence of the AI systems and their use has become one of the key factors in what Pope Francis has come to call an epochal change. AI has transformed sectors such as healthcare, education, and the workplace, and this impact has also reached the religious and legal spheres, with the result that governments and religious denominations share a common concern: the need to regulate these AI systems, which can sometimes become a direct threat to human rights and fundamental freedoms. In my intervention, I will try to outline some of the benefits that AI systems already in operation have brought, and the risks they pose in terms of safeguarding and protecting fundamental rights. I will also explain the position adopted by certain religious denominations regarding the use of AI and the solutions they propose. The phenomenon of AI as a religion. It is already a reality that AI can become the supreme being of a religion or become a divinity, assuming roles normally played by religions. In this regard, we cannot overlook the influence that ideologies such as transhumanism or posthumanism can have on people, causing a sense of detachment in the individual or a shift in traditional religious beliefs, so that when they seek or reflect on spiritual concepts or think of higher powers, they appear to be more inclined to accept the advice of an AI. If the new churches, for example, Way of the Future, the Anthony Lewandowski's church, or the Turing Church become established, what will be the legal status of these new faiths and their followers? Will these religious denominations be able to acquire legal personality and thus be entitled to the fundamental right to religious freedom? And if that were to happen, we would need to consider what the legal treatment of those denominations and their followers would be. Insights: AI in the service of faith. As a result of people's use of this technology, we are also seeing how AI systems can become powerful tools for religious practice. Artificial intelligence and new technologies can play a significant role in the teaching and dissemination of faith, as well as in religious practice itself. In this regard, it is important to highlight how religions use existing AI systems and how they have developed their own AI systems, contributing to the dissemination of religious knowledge and establishing tools that meet their specific needs. This has led to a democratization of religious knowledge, as there is now widespread access to sacred texts and tools for spiritual guidance for both believers and those who, whilst not believers, wish to learn about that religious traditions. There are also chatbots designed to answer questions and provide information or advice based on the Bible, the Quran, Buddhism, or the principle of Hinduism, and chatbots through which believers can contact the most prominent figures of different religions. For example, a platform called Text with Jesus allows users to converse with several of the most important Catholic figures. Or religious services are held, such as the Lutheran Mass celebrated in 2023 in the Bavarian city of Fürth. But we have shadows. The inappropriate use of AI also poses direct risks to the fundamental right to religious freedom. For example, AI systems can make religious profiles of users without taking into account that religion is a specially protected category and that the use of such profiles may lead to discrimination in employment or in access to certain services for these individuals. In the field of surveillance and security, the use by public authorities of facial recognition systems or predictive systems can generate a deterrent effect on individuals in the exercise of their fundamental right, as they may feel are being targeted. There are algorithms that contain biases which can lead to misinformation, fake news, or hate speech directed at religious minorities, thereby undermining freedom of expression and matters is freedom of expression and religious freedom. In such cases, the need for state neutrality regarding religious matters is also called into question, and these algorithms may undermine content moderation policies. Furthermore, systems that make automated decisions based on collected information can lead to indirect discrimination against individuals on religious grounds. Moreover, a lack of transparency and non-auditable decisions, the black boxes, are also examples of how the fundamental right to religious freedom of the users of these systems can be injured. Faced with this new technological reality that shapes our lives as citizens and believers, religions have decided to take an active role, creating their own ethical frameworks that are incorporated into the AI systems they have developed and advocating for the establishment of a set of rules governing the use of these AI systems. Rules or recommendations aimed not only at the faithful of their respective faiths who are users of these systems, but also at the owners and developers of these AI systems. The truth is that Regardless of their different theological perspectives, the major religions have agreed on their view of human dignity in relation to machines, which has enabled them to adopt a common stance in the face of the challenge posed by AI. Religious traditions such as Christianity, Islam, Judaism, or Buddhism offer perspectives on justice, equality, compassion and responsibility, guiding decision-making processes, promoting the common good, and holding individuals and organizations accountable for their actions or decisions. This is why some authors argue for the need for religious ethics in AI systems to provide a moral compass. Through the Renaissance Foundation, established by Pope Francis in 2021, the signing of the document Ethics of AI, an Abrahamic commitment to the Call of Rome, was promoted in January 2023. The document aims to serve The document aims to serve as a technical and moral roadmap, seeking to remind us that progress is not evolution unless it is accompanied by an ethical conscience. For this reason, the document commits to promoting algorithmics, an ethical framework for the development and use of AI in the fields of ethics, education, and rights through the following principles: transparency, inclusion, accountability, impartiality, reliability, security, and privacy. It seems clear that these ethical principles or values set out by the religious denominations that have signed the document could be adopted by AI systems that don't belong to these denominations. The question is, what happens when specific religious values are incorporated into an AI system in such a way that it adopts an ethical approach which is not necessarily respectful on human rights, leading to tensions with groups of people who don't share those values? On the other hand, AI systems that incorporate a broad spectrum of religious and moral values have the potential to foster understanding and cooperation between different religious groups. Therefore, the question we must ask ourselves is sufficient for AI systems to have ethical values implemented, or it is necessary to go a step further by effectively guaranteeing human rights? And if ethical values are sufficient, can we incorporate religious values? However, regardless of this collaboration, I believe that the ethical frameworks to be implemented in AI systems must include, as an indispensable minimum standard, the fundamental rights enshrined in international instruments. This is a point emphasized by the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights in her report in 2024, when she highlights the need to, quote, use the international human rights framework to guide the development and use of digital technologies. International human rights law provides the necessary safeguards to maximize the benefits and added value of digital technologies whilst reducing and mitigating their potential adverse effects on human rights. It is true that since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and having it as a premise, a large number of declarations and documents have been issued by international organizations and even companies setting out the idea of implementing a series of ethical values in AI systems, with human rights being an essential ethical value. Furthermore, an analysis of all these documents reveals how many of these principles or values are also articulated by religious denominations in their own documents. However, it is not less true that, as the European Parliament noted in its 2020 resolution on the ethical aspects of artificial intelligence, quote, ethical principles are only effective when they are also enshrined in law. For this reason, the AI Act in Europe was enacted in 2024. The regulation distinguishes between prohibited AI practices, high-risk AI systems with obligations for relevant operators, and transparency obligations for certain AI systems. The profiles explicitly relevant to freedom of religion mainly focus on the regulation of prohibited practices, Article 5. The regulation prohibits the marketing and use of biometric categorization systems that individually classify natural persons based on their biometric data to draw deductions or inference concerning religious beliefs. Another prohibited practice is that of AI systems that exploit the vulnerabilities of a natural person or a specific group of persons with the objective to cause harm. Article 27 of this AI Act establishes that before using a high-risk system, deployers must assess the impact on fundamental rights that the use of such a system may produce, considering, among other things, the intended use of the technology, the categories of affected persons, the specific risk of harm that may arise, as well as the consequent management measures to be taken. Finally, the Act establishes a right to explanation of individual decision-making processes, responding to the need that AI systems are not structured within opaque black boxes. Also, the European Union regulation establishes a series of ex-ante checks prior to the implementation of AI systems to ensure that the technology is not discriminatory, manipulative, unfair, inaccurate, or unlawful in its legal basis and purposes. The question is who carries out this ex-ante control and whether or not it may be subject to religious bias. Also, this Act states that there must be ex-post monitoring of AI systems so that they can be audited, thereby combating discrimination, bias, or algorithmic manipulation. It is essential that these systems are transparent and explainable so that users can understand the consequences of using them and thus determine whether their fundamental rights are being infringed or have been infringed. Computational law addresses how AI should incorporate current legislation into its algorithm. Consequently, it should also incorporate legal regulations concerning fundamental rights. Computer scientists and legal experts must design algorithms with these issues in mind and by incorporating these ethical values. The problem is that computational legal language must be capable of modeling this language, and we mustn't forget that there are some legal areas that may involve politically controversial values, such as religious ones, where their inclusion may be shaped by the programmer's subjectivity. Having arrived at this point in our reflection, we must address the technical and legal challenge. How can we translate the protection of religious freedom into binary code? In this regard, I'm unaware that AI systems must operate in accordance with human rights and that, therefore, they shouldn't respond to a particular religious vision. But that doesn't mean that, given the existence of religious values that coincide with certain secular values which are common and universal, we should not advocate for the inclusion of those religious values in the ethical framework that should underpin AI ethics, at least in AI systems that are not controlled or owned by religious groups. And this question leads me to raise another. Should religious values be present in AI systems developed within what Habermas, the philosopher, has defined as the informal public sphere, or in systems developed within institutional settings? Or should only values such as secularism, neutrality, or non-confessionalism be the guiding principles for these AI systems? Should a secular or non-confessional algorithm be incorporated as an ethical algorithm? I believe that the implementation of a secular algorithm to monitor neutrality in religious matters should only be required in cases where this principle of neutrality is violated, acting as a firewall and triggering an error message. This algorithm would become a sort of artificial secular benchmark that could be consulted to determine whether certain actions are compatible with the concept of secularism that one wishes to uphold and which must guarantee and protect the fundamental right to religious freedom. A neutrality which, as Heiner Bielefeld pointed out in 2014 in his report on religious discrimination in the workplace, should be understood as a policy of fair inclusion of people of diverse religious or belief orientations. In this positive interpretation, the principle of neutrality serves as an antidote to all forms of prejudice, exclusion, negative stereotypes, and discriminations. It provides an open and inclusive framework for the free and non-discriminatory expression of religious and belief diversity. However, to avoid undue interference with individual autonomy, the use of this algorithm should be considered in those AI systems operating within the institutional public sphere and in those systems in what Habermas have defined as the informal public sphere. In the former, its use should be mandatory, and the algorithm must ensure that the state's AI systems treat all citizens equally, incorporating alert systems and virtual consultation mechanisms to ensure that the administration doesn't lose its secular character. In the informal public sphere, following Habermas' thesis, this algorithm would function as an artificial moderator so that religious denominations and believers can participate in public debate and play a leading role in the construction of pluralistic and inclusive societies. Conversely, in the private and intimate sphere, it would make no sense to implement this algorithm unless the user decides that the AI system they use may or may not choose a religious belief system in order to function with the limit of the absolute respect for fundamental rights. If we want AI systems in the digital age to uphold a set of common and universal values, we mustn't forget to incorporate fundamental rights and freedoms as an indispensable standard. If the state wishes to guarantee religious freedom in the digital age, it must ensure that AI in the public sector incorporates this minimum standard an algorithm that upholds neutrality and secularism as the necessary requirement for building inclusive societies in which citizens and religious denominations can exercise their rights in a real and effective manner. In other words, societies in which social peace prevails. Computer scientists and legal experts now share the mission of designing systems that not only process data, but also model complex legal concepts, such as the principles of non-discrimination on religious grounds or state neutrality. As Antonio Guterres pointed out in 2016, in the end, it all comes down to values. We want the world our children inherit to be defined by the values enshrined in the United Nations Charter: peace, justice, respect for human rights, tolerance, and solidarity. Thank you very much.
So thank you. Thank you very much. It's really interesting, so for me, at least. I hope also for you. So, next speaker. So this time I also asked ChatGPT to introduce our next speaker. I have already tried this exercise once, and it was really interesting because when you have two people who have the same name, you have sometimes results that are quite interesting. But I think that this time we will be right. It's not your problem. I think so. So, may I let ChatGPT and Apple introduce our next speaker, Alexis Artaud de la Ferrière. I quote, "He is a Franco-British political scientist specializing in disinformation, social media and information warfare, and is a frequent commentator in the international media." I end the quote. Is that correct? I like this exercise because it shows what does the AI know about us. So,
the computer knows best.
But so be welcome. I just add that you are a senior lecturer at the Royal Holloway University of London. And so because you have changed your title, I let you introduce your topic for this afternoon. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Paulo and Mercedes and all the organizers. I know it's a lot of work to put these things on, so it's very much appreciated. I don't have any other slides other than this image, which I wanted to share with you, just something to focus on. So this is Lawrence Humphreys. He was born in Hampshire in 1571. That was a period of growing persecution of English Catholics, particularly following the excommunication of Elizabeth I by Pope Pius V in the previous year. He's reported to have been a studious youth. He was from a Protestant family, so as such, the persecution of Catholics in his younger years wasn't initially a concern for young Lawrence. But as a teenager, he began to receive religious instruction from a recusant priest, a Father Stanny, who eventually won him over to Catholicism. And although Lawrence might have continued to live out his faith in a clandestine manner, at the age of 19, he fell seriously ill. And whilst running a high fever, Lawrence became delirious and he began raving. Unfortunately, he began raving against Queen Elizabeth, notably calling her a harlot and a heretic. Well, these statements were overheard, and whilst convalescent, Lawrence was arrested and sent to Winchester Jail, accused of having violated the Treasons Act, which made it a high treason, a treasonable offense to affirm that the Queen, well, amongst other things, that the Queen ought not to enjoy the crown or to declare her a heretic or a schismatic. At his trial, Lawrence claimed that he did not recall making opprobrious statements against the Queen, having been ill, but still, on evidence of the witnesses, he was found guilty and was duly executed on July 7th, 1591. So why do I begin a paper about the impact of artificial intelligence on the right to freedom of religion or belief with a story from the 16th century? Well, I think it allows us to consider 4 points which should inform our discussion of this topic. So I'll go through those during my talk. So first of all, Lawrence's case, maybe a general point. Lawrence's case is a vivid reminder, perhaps especially for those of us who live in Europe, of the violent history that long upheld established religions, established churches, and of just how egregious violations of religious freedom can be. Of course, the threshold of such violations is not so high as public execution. Lesser forms of coercion to change or reveal one's beliefs also constitute violations, as do arbitrary, unnecessary, or illegitimate restrictions on religious practice. But in an age of digital communication and disposable culture, where many of our interactions are disembodied and perhaps insincere, perhaps where we often forget the person behind the screen, the severity of Lawrence's case is a reminder of what ultimately is at stake in this area. And what's at stake are the lives and the deeply held commitments of real individual human persons. Second, the story serves as a cautionary tale against overstating the novel character of the risks posed to FoRB by technological innovations like AI. Already, we can see, in a pre-industrial age, state and non-state actors had the capacity to restrict the ability of people to access and disseminate information about different religions. They had the capacity to mischaracterize religions in the public sphere. They had the capacity to reduce the public visibility of certain religious groups. They were able to hamper the ability of co-religionists to meet and to worship. And they were able to identify, to infiltrate, and to collect information, sometimes in a very effective manner, on religious believers and on their networks. What AI introduces is greater scalability, greater opacity, and perhaps a greater appearance of neutrality. But it does not fundamentally change the social calculus that underpins FoRB, which is that religious individuals and groups are always susceptible to restrictions and punishments when powerful organized actors take offense at their beliefs and or their practices. Third, and maybe this is a slightly controversial point, but I think it's worth stating, the historical context and the distance between us and Lawrence's story allows us to consider that those who violate the religious freedom of others are sometimes motivated by rational fear. Elizabeth's claim to the throne was genuinely contested, and her government was genuinely beset by hostile agents, foreign and domestic. Only 3 years prior to Lawrence's execution, the English fleet had defeated the Spanish Armada. And under Elizabeth's immediate predecessor, Queen Mary, Protestants had been subject to persecution by those of Lawrence Humphrey's camp. And it's reasonable, or it would have been reasonable, to assume at the time that if Catholics regained power in England, they would mete out punishment against those they regarded as heretics and schismatics. Understandably, advocates of FoRB prefer to focus on the victims of religious persecution. But to understand also the motivations of the persecutors does not equate to justifying the violations they commit. Instead, it helps us to understand the roots of conflicts and to see that the distinction between victim and perpetrator is not intrinsic to individual persons or groups, but it hinges on relative and shifting positions and allocations of power. And this notably, I think today, includes thinking about the motivations, concerns, and potential fears of those who guard and regulate AI platforms. Fourth, and this is the last of the points that I want to make, and I'll develop a little more, is that Lawrence's story highlights the central role that the communication, reception, and epistemic evaluation of information plays in the realm of religious belief and practice, as well as how restrictions on religious freedom are largely information-driven. And I think this is something that's sometimes not made explicit, the central role of information transmission, information reception, and the evaluation in terms of truth categories or potential harm and benefit of information in the realm of religious traditions, in the realm of how religious traditions are regulated. So Protestantism in England, a bit before Lawrence's time, grew during the early reign of Henry VIII. How did it grow? Well, it grew, one of the necessary conditions was through the clandestine circulation of written materials imported from the continent. It grew through the transmission of information. And once established, the Church of England's doctrine and practice were disseminated through authorized prints of the Book of Common Prayer, first compiled by Thomas Cranmer in 1549. And so first through illicit circulation of information, and then through licit, authorized, and perhaps dominant circulation of information. Equally, Lawrence Humphrey's own conversion to Catholicism in the 1580s was only possible because he accessed, at the time, proscribed Catholic catechetical materials. And his arrest was also facilitated by surveillance and denunciation, which is to say the covert collection of private information, identifying data, and the communication of such information to the state. Even the charge of treason that was brought against him constituted, in a certain sense, an epistemic crime, a crime pertaining to the evaluation of knowledge and information. Did he believe Elizabeth to be an illegitimate monarch? Did he believe her to be a heretic? And did his beliefs constitute a security risk to the crown and to the state, insofar as others might also take these statements to be true? So concerns about disinformation and about who is legitimate to decide or to dictate what constitutes true, useful, or beneficial knowledge was as true then as it is today. The connection of this fourth point, pertaining to information, to the topic of AI is particularly salient. AI models are probability-based information processing systems. They are trained to seek patterns in large data sets and then to classify and evaluate information based on human prompts. So there's a large kind of category of these systems. We often tend to think about the chatbots. There's more than that, but in all cases, what they're doing is they're being trained on massive troves of information, and they are on a probabilistic model offering a certain organization of that information in natural language or in some sort of digital-based function. So observers in the FoRB realm have expressed, and Jaime's covered some of this, have expressed a number of concerns pertaining to the use of generative AI and how it might pose specific risks to the freedom of religion and belief. So we could list these, and I think there's probably more than we're completely aware of, and also we're not completely aware of the extent and the actual impact of many of these risks. I think one of the issues is that the evidence base for to what extent these risks are currently actualized is thin, partly because something that Jaime said, the possibility of auditing these systems is very difficult. But observers have mentioned a number of risks, so those include filtering information on these systems or downranking certain results in favor of others, or mischaracterizing religious groups, whether that's intentional on behalf of the developers or whether that's as a result of emergent bias because of the data on which the system was trained. That might be particularly a problem for minority groups where there's less data or there's perhaps imperfect data. Also, risks might include facilitating the infiltration of religious communities. So there was a recent case at the beginning of the current war in Iran that you might have heard about, where the Israeli security forces hacked a popular Iranian prayer app called Baba Saba Calendar. And so they hacked it and it's an app that helps you kind of keep track of your daily prayers. So they would emit pieces of propaganda through the app and encourage them to turn against the government. So you have infiltration. Another concern is the scaling up and the aggregation of a wide spectrum of surveillance data points. So surveillance, as we said, existed already in Lawrence Humphrey's time. But clearly today, the scale of it and the scope of it, and our ability to identify individual persons, their practices, their beliefs, their networks, is much stronger. So, for example, it's been reported that the Chinese state triangulates data from phone apps to transmit information on user activity in their locations with facial recognition technology and CCTV cameras placed at temples, churches, and mosques to keep tabs not only on individual attendance and social networks, but also to keep tabs on the contents of religious services and who is being exposed to what information. So there's a lot of focus on China in particular, but technically speaking, all the infrastructure for that sort of surveillance certainly exists where I live in the UK. These practices are distinct in technique, but not in substance from the information security apparatus that captured Lawrence Humphreys. As artificial intelligence technologies are increasingly used to access information, to craft speech, to facilitate infiltration, also profiling, and to expand surveillance, it appears inevitable that these technologies will, certainly they have, but will increasingly impact on religious practices and beliefs. The nature, the extent, and the valence of those impacts, how harmful or maybe also how beneficial, we talked about the lights and the shadows, the nature, the extent, and the valence of such impacts and how such impacts are going to evolve in step with the development of large language models, those remain open questions. However, whatever the impact, it will occur through the matrix of how and who can access, process, and evaluate information about religious groups and individuals. This matters in a special way for the freedom of religion or belief because FoRB is arguably, we might characterize it as a truth-oriented right, in the sense that its proper end is to allow people to explore, discern, and externally express ideas about ultimate values and the nature of reality. It serves this end by protecting spaces of deep and persistent disagreement in belief and disagreement in practice. And in this sense, FoRB can be understood as a framework for regulating what we might call epistemic risk, our potential for error in knowledge acquisition. Epistemic risk, of course, takes two distinct forms, and William James had a kind of famous articulation of these two aspects of epistemic risk. He says that we must know the truth and we must avoid error. These are our first and greatest commandments as would-be knowers, but they are not two ways of stating an identical commitment. They are two separable laws. So we may form false beliefs, or we may fail to form true beliefs. And when we're thinking about epistemic risk and how we regulate access to information, both of those considerations need to be attended to. So this framework is directly relevant to AI. Artificial intelligence is an information processing technology, the outputs of which must be evaluated in terms of their truth claims and their relative negative or positive benefit, however we measure that. And a central question in regulating AI is precisely how to handle the trade-offs between truth-seeking and error avoidance, and also who bears responsibility for calibrating that risk. Analyzing the impact of AI on FoRB thus means asking how AI systems affect both dimensions of epistemic risks. Do these AI systems, these platforms, do they generate false or harmful information about religions, religious groups, religious individuals? And also asking whether they suppress or distort the formation of true or at the very least legitimate information. So a full answer to those questions remains elusive. We're largely constrained by our limited understanding of how AI systems actually work. But the threat that AI poses to religious liberty, or the multiple threats, are largely the same as those faced by the young Lawrence Humphreys as he stood on a scaffold in 1791. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexis. Now it's my honor to introduce you Susana Machado. And so, again, I let the AI present her. So, Susana Machado is a lawyer and lecturer at the Polytechnic Institute of Porto, specializing in employment law and issues relating to religious freedom in the workplace. I end quote. Is that correct? Perfect this time. So it's quite amazing how does the AI work. Sometimes for people it's not working at all, and for some others it's just the right things. So we still have to be careful with the AI. So the title of your talk, Susana Machado, is AI and Freedom of Religion in the Workplace, New Frontier of Surveillance and Discrimination. So it will be a pleasure to listen to you, and the floor is yours.
So do I need to tell you? Okay. Pues funciona, si no funciona, pues te digo. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, thank you, Paulo, thank you, Mercedes, thank you, Ruben, for this invitation. It is for me an honor to be part of this family and learn so much from all of you. Here we discuss freedom, but true freedom comes from understanding others. But for that, we must have time. And in today's hyper-connected world, we do not always have it. And today I would like to reflect on how artificial intelligence is changing the way of freedom of religion is experienced at the workplace. This is not only a technical issue, it is more about how technologies affect one of the most personal aspects of human life, belief. So the growing integration of artificial intelligence into the workplace raises fundamental questions concerning the effective protection of freedom of religion. While this right has traditionally been analyzed through the perspective of visible manifestation, such as dress or symbols, contemporary technological developments shift the focus towards less visible yet more intrusive forms of control, namely in the workplace. Artificial intelligence enables the large-scale processing of personal data, allowing employers not only to monitor employees, but also to draw conclusions about their behavior, preferences, and potentially their beliefs. This transformation calls for a reconsideration of the conceptual and legal framework governing freedom of religion in the labor relations. As highlighted by a Portuguese cardinal that works together with the Pope, Tolentino Mendonça, who is also a poet, contemporary societies face the challenge of preserving spaces of interiority in increasingly data-driven environments. The workplace, now deeply mediated by digital technologies, becomes a central arena where this tension grows. Freedom of religion protects the right to believe, the right to express those beliefs, and in the workplace, this freedom has always been limited, as we know, by the organization of the company, by the employer's authority, and the need to respect others. This balancing exercise is well illustrated in some cases, such as the case Akbita, where the Court of Justice of the European Union accepted that a general policy prohibiting visible religious symbols may be permitted if applied in a neutral and consistent manner. Equally, in the case Micropol, the court clarified that customer preference cannot justify a different treatment based on religion. But these cases reflect a traditional paradigm, that its religious freedom is evaluated mostly in relation to visible expression. But now, artificial intelligence disrupts this paradigm. In the past, employers react to what they could see. They react to symbols, clothing, behavior, requests for time off. Now technology allows employers to analyze a large amount of data about employees. From this data, systems may draw conclusions about habits, routines, and even possible beliefs. For example, regular absence at certain times may suggest a certain prayer practice, or names or language used may be linked to a religious background. This can happen without the employee or the candidate saying anything. For instance, imagine a recruitment process for a job. Algorithmic discrimination on postal codes occurs, for example, when AI systems use geographic data to discriminate against religion or ethnics, because certain postal codes can heavily correlated with specific religious communities living in certain places. And AI systems rely on large-scale data processing and model recognition In doing so, they enable the creation of detailed profiles of employees and candidates. This raises a fundamental issue. Religious identity may be attributed without being expressed. And this creates a new problem. Freedom of religion is supposed to protect what a person believes, even if they never express it. But what happens if an algorithmic system guesses a person's belief? So imagine a recruitment system that prefers candidates with certain profiles, or a promotion system that uses behavioral data. Even if religion is not directly used, other elements may act as a signal. A useful comparison can be made with, again, the case Micropole. In this case, an employee was dismissed because a client objected to her wearing headscarf. The court said that customer preference cannot justify discrimination. And what about AI? With AI, the risk is similar, but less visible. Decisions may be influenced by hidden factors, and it becomes much more harder to prove unfair treatment and to prove discrimination. Together with the profiling, AI has significantly intensified workplace surveillance. Modern monitoring systems can track digital activity, communications, productivity metrics, and even emotional or behavior indicators. Workplace surveillance is increasingly described as an organizing principle of modern employment, shaping both organizational structures and individual behavior. This transformation has several characteristics, such as monitoring is continuous rather than episodic, analysis is predictive rather than descriptive, and control is partially automated. Such environments generate certain forms of pressure on employees. Even in the absence of an explicit restriction, individuals may avoid expressing their religious beliefs, avoid refrain from requesting accommodation, and adjust their behavior to align with the supposed expectations of the system. This creates an alarming effect on the exercise of religious freedom, not through prohibition, but through behavioral conditioning. If monitoring is too strong, employees may feel they cannot believe according to their beliefs. AI systems are often presented as objective and neutral. However, their outputs depend on the data used to train them and the statements fixed in their design. Research demonstrates that algorithmic decision-making may reproduce or amplify the existing social biases. In the employment context, this may lead to discriminatory recruitment practices, biased performance evaluations, unequal access to promotion. Essentially, discrimination may occur indirectly. Removing protected characteristics from datasets does not eliminate discrimination, as systems may still rely on connected indicators. Some examples include penalization of career gaps linked to religious observance, negative evaluation of non-standard working forms, exclusion of candidates associated with faith-based organizations. AI systems are trained to use past data. This can create problems if the data reflects social inequalities. For example, certain religious groups may be underrepresented or linked to stereotypes. This may lead to unfair results, even without intention. Another important case, it's the case UAIDA. In this case, a worker wanted to wear a cross at work. The court recognized that her right had been violated because the employer did not give enough weight to her religious expression. This case nowadays is useful to remind us that even neutral rules can affect people differently, and the law must look at real impact, not only formal equality. What is going now? With AI, this idea becomes more complex because decisions are often not transparent, and it is difficult to understand how they are made. This form of discrimination is particularly difficult to detect and to prove, given the opacity of the algorithmic systems. Now, the European Union, as Jaime mentioned, the European Union has responded to these challenges through the adoption of the Artificial Intelligence Act. The Act classifies IA systems used in employment as high risk, recognizing their potential impact on fundamental rights. It introduces requirements such as risk assessment, transparency obligations, human oversights, and safeguards against discrimination. This reflects an important step towards human-centered AI governance. But the specific implications for freedom of religion, in my opinion, remain underexplored. As recent research indicates, AI systems may function as tools of surveillance that threaten religious diversity and reinforce marginalization of the minorities. The impact of AI requires, in my opinion, a reconceptualization of religious freedom in the workplace. In this context, religious freedom must include, first, the right not to be subject to religious profiling. Second, the right to protection against excessive surveillance. And third, the right to transparent decision-making. To conclude, just to go back to the Cardinal Tolentino Mendonça, he emphasizes that contemporary societies must preserve spaces of interiority, areas of human experience that are not fully exposed to external control. AI challenges precisely this boundary. Artificial intelligence is transforming, in fact, the conditions under which freedom of religion is exercised in the workplace. The central risk lies not only in explicit discrimination, but in more subtle forms of control. In this emerging landscape, religious freedom becomes increasingly linked to issues of data governance, transparency, and human dignity. Ensuring its effective protection requires both legal, innovative, and deeper understanding of how technology reshapes the relationship between the individual, the employer, and the personal sphere of belief. Thank you.
So thank you very much to all of you. For me, it was really interesting, and I really appreciate your intervention. So I think we can give a second one time. Thank you. So, now I may introduce the commentator. So, Peter Sick. I didn't ask the AI because he is from the AIDLR. He's the director of the AIDLR chapter for the Czech Republic. So the floor is yours, Peter.
Good afternoon to everyone. It's a privilege for me to be here. And at the start, I should to admit I am not an expert of artificial intelligence. But anyway, I have been exploring a little bit digital questions for a relatively short time. So I stand before you more as a student of these experts than as a master. However, it is precisely from this perspective of a concerned observer that I wish to offer my reflection now. I want to thank our speakers for their brilliant contributions. Professor Rossell, thank you for your showing us the hidden side of the law. Dr. de la Ferrière, your points of governance are vital. Dr. Machado, thank you for highlighting the daily struggle in our offices and workplaces. And Professor Andreescu, unfortunately, she's not here, but anyway, I studied a little bit her work also, and it is a great impact on the roadmap for our schools. Just to mention. Today, we are talking about faith in the digital age. We used to think religious freedom was just about the law. But today, our spiritual life is being processed through hidden automated systems. Professor Rossell talked about the lights and shadows. Many people believe that computer programs are perfectly fair because they use logic. But we know that isn't true. Modern software takes the human prejudices it finds in our world and repeats them at a much larger scale. For example, think about online search results. If your search for religious information, does the software prioritize one view while hiding others? Or think about automated security. If a digital system trained to flag certain religious traditions as suspicious, the automated judgment is made before a human even looks at the case. My question is, if the digital light only shines on the majority, how do we protect the people standing in the shadow? This leads us to Dr. de la Ferrière's point on value alignment. Right now, there is a race to teach technology what is right and wrong. But we have to ask, who gets to be the teacher? When a programmer in a big tech company decides what is harmful content and what is a genuine expression of faith, they are acting like a digital gatekeeper. They are writing the rules of what we are allowed to believe online. If we let private companies decide these things, religious freedom becomes just another term and conditions box. Those long legal rules we all click accept on without ever reading. Are we ready to let computer script decide which beliefs are acceptable? Now let's look at our daily life. Dr. Machado spoke about the tracking at work. Think of an office worker and delivery driver. If software is tracking every second of the day, it does not understand a break for prayer. It only sees a loss of output. It sees a human soul as delay in process. But we can also mention the importance of education. We don't just need to learn how to use computers, we need digital wisdom. We need to teach the next generation how to find their own path in a world of viral videos. We need to teach them how to remain individuals when the software wants to turn them into just another predictable user. To bring these ideas together, I see two possible points in the future. On one hand, we have the digital garden, a place where technology helps us grow. Think of a believer joining a global community through their phone or visiting a holy site through virtual reality. It's a place of deep connection. On the other hand, we have the data network, a world where every move is tracked to predict what we will do next. My concern is this. If an algorithm constantly suggests what we should believe or how we should pray, is our faith still a result of our own free will? Or are we simply following a path that a computer chooses for us? To finish, I want to say this. The challenge of the next 10 years is not just about laws. It is about who we are as humans. In the past, we had constitutions to protect our souls from the state. Today, we need to protect our souls from the programming code. Religious freedom is not just about what you feel in the heart anymore. It's about making sure that automated systems respect your right to be free, unpredictable, and especially human being. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Peter. So we may have time for one or two brief questions. No? You need a break? So we need the microphone, but... Or do you want to come here?
A quick question to Alexis, because you referred to the use of AI when it comes to also teaching about religions or beliefs. And we are here in Toledo, where exactly 20 years ago, the Toledo guiding principles on teaching about religions and beliefs were adopted. And one of the key principles is that nothing about without the communities, which of course, if you ask then AI, is completely neglected. So why do we believe blindly in something that comes from a machine where every education ministry or authority would be really rightly criticized for completely not engaging with the religious communities when it comes to factual information or education about religions or beliefs? So I don't have an answer, but why do we let this happen so easily?
So I think there's kind of an empirical, there's kind of a descriptive response. So how does it happen? So I think that there's a story to say about how certain forms of knowledge become authoritative, and they become authoritative on the basis of dominant systems, and systems, I suppose, to a certain extent, systems that can also crowd out alternatives. And so, I think large language models have an aura of authority that, and it's probably not also a coincidence that the trust that people have in large language models increasing is also coinciding with the moment where there's decreasing trust in social institutions and representative bodies like parliaments, like trade unions, like churches, etc. So I think there's just a shift there. But in a way, I would say this again, isn't new. There are shifts of epistemic authority from one institution to another over time. And so we see the emerging of a new sector of epistemic authority, which expresses itself through these platforms. To what extent is it a problem? I think we didn't have time to get into it, but I think there is a question here about the distinction between platforming and distinctions between kind of neutral access. So for example, I mean, in kind of telecoms policy, it's not my area, but in telecoms policy, there's generally a notion of kind of neutral access across networks. It's not necessarily the case that particular large language models have that, I suppose, duty or obligation of neutrality or representativity that networks or communication systems do. It's not obvious to me that everybody has a right to be equally or fairly represented on platform X or Y or Z. You can withdraw from a platform, you can make alternative platforms. There is a market there in the same way that, we don't expect newspapers to equally and fairly represent all of these communities. And we could say more about that, but there's a kind of brief account.
All right, so we do not have the time for another question. The last one.
Yes, very short question because connected with Jaime and Mercedes' presentation. Thank you so much. My point of view is, what is your opinion about giving legal personality to AI in the next future? I repeat the question, Alexis. What is your opinion about giving legal personality to AI in the next future? That's really it's the point.
That's the point, yeah. That's the point. AI systems with legal personality. Which AI systems? All of them? Only the private one? The institutional one too? And if not, for example, Jewish theology, they don't consider that AI systems must have legal personality. And they use the metaphor of the golem and rabbi law. A machine cannot have the status of a person, of a human being. But if not the AI systems, the programmer is the responsible, the owner of the AI system. That's the point. So we need legislation and universal legislation in which all we need to be in the same, we need to have the same opinion about what can we do with these AI systems. So the question is, there is not only one AI systems, we have different AI systems. I'm not concerned about private AI systems. I'm concerned about institutional AI systems that are that the owner is the state, or AI systems that operate in the informal public sphere. For example, YouTube and all these kind of platforms that are free for all the people. That's the point, I think.
Thank you. I do not have an answer for you, and I agree with Jaime, but just to point out that the question is very important in terms of liability. And that's the question. If we have an answer, it will be very, very good to solve the questions of liability. But it's a way, and I don't know where where is the end. Thank you.
So at the end, yes or no? Who knows? So thank you very much. It's time to have a break.